oh, people are afraid, of change. They're afraid to pick up new things. And actually, in reality, humans as people, we love novelty. We love change. Actually, we love to do new things. The thing that we are afraid of is the unknown.
The current generation and younger generations want authenticity more than they ever have.
Yeah.
And yet we've got this generative stuff that feels inauthentic.
There is a certain level of skepticism. There is a lack of trust, and there's real concerns around privacy.
Welcome to episode 1 of CommCast with Jersey Road, where we want to equip you as the comms professional in your messaging that you would be direct and clear in an ever-changing environment. I'm Liam Flint, Marketing and Communications Officer at Jersey Road. Delighted to say I'm joined by Managing Director Gareth Russell. Gareth, we finally got this podcast going. It's been a while in the making, hasn't it?
It has been, but I think it's the right time for us to be doing this. I think there's a really dynamic, fast-changing environment that we're working in with comms, and what we're hoping to do is bring in experts in different fields to help us navigate that a little bit. So I'm going to try and not hit that microphone like I just did, and we're going to have a great time together.
We're going to have a great show.
Yeah.
So can you just sum up for us, people listening or watching to this, what can they expect from us in these next few moments in future episodes? What are they going to be getting by listening to this CommCast?
Well, what we've tried to do is listen to what some of our clients and some of the people that we work with have been talking about, them seeing where the trends are going, where the pain points are, and identify what are those key issues, and then to bring people in who are in those spaces and listen, get their wisdom, see how it applies to our contexts, and then, go on that journey together.
Okay, so enough of us. Let's introduce our guest for episode 1. Delighted to have James Poulter with us. James, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be here, guys.
We'll do a little nice introduction, just to make people realise how important you are and how valued you are in this panel.
So short.
Short and sweet. So James is CEO of Vixen Labs. So you run that yourself. You've got over 10 years experience in marketing and comms. So we're really looking forward to hearing your insight. Could you just give us a little bit of a flavour, James, of your background and how you've come to be such an AI expert that we've called you in for this one?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having us. And so the past, I suppose, 15 years or so of my career has been in a variety of different disciplines when it comes to marketing and communications. But most notably, for the past 5 years, we've been running Vixen Labs, which I founded with my co-founder, Jen, to really help, I suppose, the world of brands and businesses navigate this space of artificial intelligence. And when we first started, a large focus of that was really around voice technology as a big area of growth. Things like Alexa, Google Assistant were becoming really prominent. And then obviously in the past, 18 months or so, things have completely changed with the advent of things like ChatGPT, and large language models have completely reinvigorated that space. And so we now serve a much broader set of needs across things like chatbots and this emerging world of generative search as well. But prior to that, I'd worked in a variety of different comms disciplines, as I said before. Before setting up Vixen Labs, I worked at Lego for a number of years, leading an emerging technology team there, which was within the marketing and kind of digital consumer engagement division. So we were doing things like brand partnerships. We were looking at experiments with platforms like Giphy and Headspace, and then on to developing our first voice and AI experiences and playing around with the blockchain, the digital one, not the real bricks. And prior to that, I've worked in a whole bunch of other agency contexts as well, including the advertising agencies like Ogilvy and Edelman, the PR firm as well. So I've kind of done a range of different things.
Did you, because AI, it feels to, I think, most people is something that happened in the last 2 years. But did you always have a tech kind of leaning or in your comms, or is it something that you've just seen a trend and you've jumped on it? Yeah,
so I try and stay, I suppose, on the forefront of whatever the innovation is at the time. So when I first went into a communications career back at in my first role, starting at Ogilvy back in the early in the early 2000s, was really working on the early days of social media before it was even social media. I mean, we were doing blogger relations, and we were kind of setting up Twitter feeds for brands when you could only access Twitter via a mobile device on text.
MySpace.
So, and actual MySpace brand pages and things like that. So, and that was where my first foray is at that time. But of course, that was so nascent then. And so worked through that worked then into kind of the mobile app space, and then when I went into Lego, the first thing I was actually going to do was to build a social network for kids, which we did. It's called Lego Life. It's now around the world. Over I think 5 million kids use it now, messaging one another with their Lego creations, and we got to kind of do all sorts of things in that. And artificial intelligence was an early part of that as well, not in the form that we would know it now, but in things like machine learning, and in particular when it comes to things like moderation systems, because when you're letting kids start sharing content with one another, you've also got to look after them as well. So we were doing some of that kind of early stuff. But the AI that we now work with, whilst it's been in creation for a long time, yes, only really in the past couple of years has it hit such a level where the average brand, the average communications person is thinking, man, I've got to do something about this.
Yeah.
I think he knows what he's talking about, so that's a good, that's a good
You
start.
don't.
Someone knows.
I think I know
what's
yeah.
going on in
Yeah.
this podcast. That's a good start.
I think it feels to me like, and again, I'm definitely a novice when it comes to all this stuff, but it feels to me like AI is being used interchangeably for different things, meaning that actually are not AI or maybe are part of AI. But how? I mean, this is maybe an impossible question, but how is AI being utilized right now? I mean, it feels like is it just everywhere, or is there specific areas in which AI is really starting to kind of see some traction?
Well, the talk about it is everywhere. The talk about AI is everywhere, in the same way that 18 months ago, the talk about the metaverse was everywhere as well. So I think we also have to kind of do a bit of a gut check sometimes between the rhetoric that's happening, that we're seeing in the news media, that we're seeing on social media, versus what's actually going on under the hood. But I think in the past 12 months, this kind of consumer adoption of AI, particularly in the form of next level chatbots, the likes of ChatGPT from OpenAI or Anthropic's Claude model or Google Bard, these types of tools, that really has hit a massive amount of our communications professionals very, very quickly, and they are adopting it. This week, as we're recording here in the first week of December, we at Vixen have just released the AI Consumer Index, which is our annual study of the adoption of AI tools and technologies, and we found that in the US and the UK already over a third of people have tried some kind of generative AI tool, and over 40% of them in the US are already using ChatGPT or have used it in the past month. So that level of adoption at a consumer level naturally impacts all of us, right? Because we're all consumers in some way. And so that means that people are using it for a whole variety of different tasks. Now, whether or not businesses are adopting it in a true sense, beyond just the average person in their workforce maybe has an account and is trying out to, I don't know, use a tool like Canva with their AI, or using Notion to rewrite something or manage a database, or perhaps the AI tools that are showing up in obviously things like HubSpot and many of the other CRM systems. That's the level that we see most people being at. I would call it quite a consumer or even maybe like tabloid level understanding of AI. What I think we'll see in 2024, however, is that real proper adoption of it as an enterprise tool, and particularly as a business tool. And that's very similar, I think, in the same way that we saw previous technology revolutions. The early days of social media were very similar. So we should expect that that continues to grow. But right now it's at that kind of quite early stage.
Because, I mean, we're obviously working in the comms space. We're seeing it with the PR databases that we're using. They're using AI to monitor, track, but also just even for journalist contacts and that sort of thing. We're seeing some of our clients are starting to wrestle with how do we use AI, particularly in the not-for-profit space. There's all the ethical and moral concerns as well, but how can AI be a force for good in this not-for-profit sector, and is there any examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely it can. In the same way that we would look at any other technology tools that have come before it, there are going to be opportunities to use it to make things faster, make processes simpler, reduce kind of latency in the way in which we run our operations, all those types of tools. If you're sitting at the moment in front of one of the PR databases these days, then obviously you might have new tools at your hands that you can kind of get to contacts quicker or track what's going on. How much AI really is under the hood of that is maybe questionable in some cases.
Just a marketing line from them.
Yeah, but when it comes to things like rewriting press releases or transforming content from a release into social media posts, for example, or doing some kind of brainstorming and campaigning, then these things can act like thought partners. And you'll hear this word Copilot come up quite a lot in the way in which, Microsoft have even called their 365 tool Copilot. But that's the way in which we think about using these things in the way which we get things done. I don't think that's necessarily specific to non-profits. That I think is for all of us that are in some kind of knowledge work, which for most marketing and comms disciplines, that's where we sit. So there are opportunities there, even doing things like this, recording podcasts and video content. The amount of tools now that are coming in to the software stack that we would use to plan these types of shows, to edit these types of shows, and to distribute them are going to reduce the cost and time of making these types of products for businesses so drastically. The fact that you do, I think, still need a great editor, but that editor is going to be far quicker than they were even 12 months ago with the plugins for Premiere Pro or DaVinci Resolve or whatever they might be using. So the same goes for the person that's writing the press release, the same for the person that's putting together that media list, who's going to reach out to comms contacts. They all have these tools at their disposal. It's like having a really good co-pilot, but in the same way that you wouldn't get in a plane with just a co-pilot, you shouldn't be kind of getting into kind of a program of work with just relying upon these tools. It relies on us as well.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah, just picture there. And I think there does seem to be a bit of a flavour of fear attached as well. So you've rattled off there a lot of the positives. It does feel like you look at the news, you do hear lots of experts who know what they're talking about with AI, but they still say, oh, we need to really be careful of the ethical side. We need to be careful it doesn't take jobs or do this or that. It feels like the average person in their comms role would still be a bit skeptical. And I'm sure they're listening, viewing this, thinking, I really want to be encouraged in this, because it's not something we can opt out of, is it? I think that's one of the big statements, is that it is already here. And it's not a choice to embrace it or not. It's about how you do that. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this isn't something that we're planning for 12 months from now or 18 months from now. This is absolutely here and already being embraced by firms large and small, by businesses large and small. And so you now are competing against the next team next to you that has chosen to go forward and use these tools or not. That's where the competitive edge comes from. But you're right, there is a certain level of skepticism. There is a lack of trust, and there's real concerns around privacy. Again, from the study that we've released this week in the AI Consumer Index, we've found that over 40% of people will heavily agree with the statements that I don't trust chatbots or I worry about my privacy when using chatbots. Those same 40% of people, though, are using them.
Yeah, right.
And this is not uncommon. In every technology revolution that we've seen since the dawn of time, people worried that these technologies would come and take jobs, from the modern car to the printing press. All of the copywriters who were literally the ones who would copy out the writing worried that the printing press was going to take their jobs. Some of them it did, but then they went on to do other things, right? They became typesetters and they went on to do other things.
So why is that, though? Is that because the fear of missing out on the technology is just greater than the fear of what the technology might do with our data or might do with our jobs?
Well, the thing is that I think we often think when it comes to any form of digital transformation, and this AI wave is going to bring in a whole nother raft of digital transformation, that we think that is usually about, people are afraid, of change. They're afraid to pick up new things. And actually, in reality, humans as people, we love novelty. We love change. Actually, we love to do new things. The thing that we are afraid of is the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen once that change has occurred. And so when you bring new technology into the workplace or into a process, you'll always have a great group of people that are really excited to pick up and embrace that, but there'll be another group that will always go, I'm afraid of what I don't know on the other side of this. Right. And I think that is the thing that most of the rhetoric we see is around when it comes to fear, is the fear of jobs going, or the fear of, what will I do if I can't get there quick enough, or I can't learn this fast enough. These are the things that people worry about. Actually, the fear around the actual technology itself really is not the thing that people seem to be that concerned with. Now, concerns around privacy are legitimate, right? But the history of the internet for the past four decades now has been the exchange of privacy for utility. That is the way it goes, right? We will always give up a certain degree of privacy for a certain amount of utility back. And that's what we're already seeing, is that these tools are useful enough for most people to give up a certain level of privacy. And the same is true for everything that we have on our phones today, right? You wouldn't be able to get in an Uber if you weren't willing to give up the privacy of where you are. Right? And it wouldn't be a very good app if you didn't do that.
Yeah, it's a bit awkward at that point, isn't
exactly.
it? Yeah, it doesn't work quite as well.
No.
Just speaking more specifically to the church and to Christian organizations, I sit on the board of an organization who are involved in Bible translation, and they have invested alongside others quite heavily into new technologies, and particularly in AI, and that has taken the target date of when The Bible will be translated into the heart language of every language down by 100 years. So I think it was 2150, and it's now 2033, actually more than 100 years. There's other organizations that are working in the Christian space. There's a media organization who I've seen use AI where the presenter only speaks English, but the AI is changing the shape of his lips and what he's saying. So he's now speaking in Mandarin and in German and in Hindi. So it feels, I mean, this is just anecdotal, but it feels like Christian organizations are actually a little different to what the stereotype is in this space, where quite often with new things, the Christian organizations, the church has always been quite a far way behind the curve. Right. Is that changing, do you think? And how can Christian organizations lead in this area?
So I think we probably see two distinct groups emerging at the moment. There is the groups that you've just described, which are Christian organisations in particular, and I would say predominantly the parachurch organisations that are very excited about this technology for all of the reasons that you've just cited, because it's going to speed up processes. They're often reliant upon donations as their source of funding, right? So if you can do more with less, then absolutely this is a massive boon to your technology. The secondary group, though, that seems to be having more challenge with it is the churches themselves,
right?
And I think that and I mean that both at a large, kind of mega church level down to small congregation level, and also a denominational point of view, because embracing this technology asks a lot of its people, and there is it brings about a lot of questions around. What does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to use this technology with other humans? And what are we willing to do and what are we not willing to do? And so the minute it begins to touch the church congregation, I think we see a certain level of nervousness from the church. But what I would say is overall, compared to previous technology revolutions, I would say this is like my fourth that I've gone through as both being a working person in both a Christian and non-Christian context. I've not seen this embrace of this technology happen as fast as I have done with the AI stuff. Social media, there was a real pushback in the early days. We've seen for years people push back on things like online church and web streaming platforms, and even having a church website and stuff like that for a long time was seen as, oh no, that's not for us. And obviously COVID was a big factor in turning a lot of that stuff around. Right. But this embrace of AI has happened far quicker than I was expecting, and the amount of Christian organisations that are now emerging to respond to this in terms of their own thoughts around what AI should look like, how we have an interfaith dialogue around it, how do we have an ecumenical dialogue around it, that has grown so much quicker than I would expect. And so I think we'll see these two camps continue to probably blend and merge over time. Naturally, a lot of the people working in those parachurch organisations are also members of churches, and they'll be having an influence there as well. But for lots of church leaders, we see an awful lot of people across that spectrum who are still quite afraid, quite worried about what this might mean, but also really want to embrace it where they can, because they're as time poor as everybody else.
And there's going to be a pastoral issues for those church leaders to deal with.
Yeah. I think particularly the pastoral issues are the ones that people are concerned about. And I always cite the example of, what happens when a young person comes to a youth leader and says, I've fallen in love with a chatbot.
Yeah, right.
How does the pastor respond in that situation? I don't think most church leaders are prepared for that type of conversation to happen yet. Yeah. But if you come to them and say, hey, I found you a tool that can help you write a sermon in a third of the time, I think they'll be absolutely there. Do you know what I mean? So, and so they should do. But then if they're going to do that, then it's also about bringing those questions about, well, should I do this? It's the Jurassic Park thing, right? It's like, just because we can, should we?
Should we? Yeah.
Well, I think that worked all right, didn't it?
Worked out just fine. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's really consideration as well, because for faith groups, I think that ethical, moral line maybe is slightly different in terms of where it's placed. Yes. Because of the values they hold. So I think that's a really important thing to think of. And
that's important because we hold an ethical line, and we have an agreed, for the most part at least, despite kind of ecumenical disagreements about things, which there are obviously many, but for the most part we hold an established set of morals and principles, and therefore when we go and embrace these technologies, it's natural that kind of moral kind of water table kind of rises to meet the expectations of the technology. For those outside of a kind of church context, it's harder these days to have that agreed set of moral frameworks and principles, which is why there are so many debates about how should we embrace AI ethically, because people can't agree on what were those ethics in the first place. So I think that's why we're also seeing the church respond in this way, I think, quicker than we maybe have done in previous technology revolutions, because it asks much more fundamental ethical questions than even social media did or other technologies that have come before.
The nature of being human, as you said earlier, and that type of thing. Yeah, absolutely. Are there churches in the metaverse?
Yeah, so I mean, the churches in the metaverse is an interesting challenge. There have been, so we've seen many partners, kind of do experiments in this. The guys at Life Church who run YouVersion and the Bible app were very early to do those early experiments, and we've seen others who are continuing to try and create metaverse engagement platforms. But the big difference, I suppose, between what's happening there and the AI revolution is that there's not been a hardware adoption requirement that we've seen with the metaverse. And I think this is another reason why it's being adopted so quickly, is that this technology, particularly in the form of large language models, which, if you're watching this, you hopefully understand what I'm talking about, but the big databases of information that underpin the training of these chatbots, they have been there for a long time in the background being built, and all of a sudden they're just in every bit of software that you're using every day, and so deployed to millions of people with no barrier to entry whatsoever. And I think why we've seen this is quite different from other technology, you could argue fads or trends, at least in the past couple of years, whether it's the metaverse, whether it's augmented reality, whether it's NFTs and the blockchain, is that it's just no barrier to entry. All of these other tech have had quite a level of onboarding required, or either you physically have to go out and buy a headset, which most people just don't want to do. Or at least Meta's own sales figures would support that most people won't go and do. So it's just a slightly different paradigm, and the fact that it's become available to all of us so quickly, I think, is what's driving that adoption.
Okay, so we've spoken about big picture AI. If people are listening, watching this, thinking, right, I'd love to utilize this more in my team.
Yeah.
What are some practical ways? What are some of the questions we need to be asking in our teams in order for us to make the most of our AI potential? Are there certain things you would say, right, get in a room with your team, discuss this, have you thought about this? Are there any practical go and do's that you would say to people?
Well, so a lot of people's initial worry about using AI in their business context in particular is, am I training this algorithm with like data that I shouldn't be putting in there?
Right.
And the answer to that is you could be. Do not be going and uploading like a whole bank of email addresses of journalists that you know into ChatGPT.
All right, undo.
Without their permission, because GDPR is still a thing. But one of the things that can protect you against a lot of that, which maybe people don't want to hear, is you can go and pay for these services, and actually you'll be in a much better state of affairs. Now, I'm not here to kind of rep you, signing up for ChatGPT Plus, subscriptions, but at least when paying for these tools, you are at least entering into an enterprise agreement with a company for them to protect your data. And so that, I think, is one of the first things, is like, get your teams using proper accounts, have management over them, and make sure that you know how they're being used. Because I'm certain that in the customers that we're speaking to in kind of large commercial clients, there will be many people that know how many accounts of these different tools are being run on company credit cards, and there'll be a whole bunch of other ones that they don't know about at all. So if you're running a firm or a business, the first thing is I would get a handle on your people using this technology and make sure you know how they're using it. But once you've got that barrier sorted, then actually get experimenting, because I think this is the big thing, is that people need to be willing to try and learn. This is not the type of stuff that is easily taught in the classroom without doing some real hands-on. We run generative AI workshops at Vixen all the time, and a large part of that is literally sitting next to people and walking them through how to write prompts, how to kind of get better at doing that, because it's something you have to experience. Because these language models, they're not actually algorithms. There's not an E equals MC squared or an A plus B equals C. The result you get every time is different based upon the prompt that you craft. And everyone will craft those prompts differently. So I think really getting your head around how to use that tech is a very hands-on type of thing. So that would be the first couple of steps. And then overarchingly, I think the big thing is disclose to the clients you're working with, the people that you're working with, and particularly your employees, how are you using AI in the background? Because I think this is going to become a question that rises up time and time again, particularly in employee communications or internal comms. People want to know, hey, is this statement that was just sent to me by our CEO actually written by our CEO? Or if it was prompted or you worked on with an AI counterpart, then that's fine. But like, I want to kind of know whether that's the case, because people will raise questions about what is genuine, and that's just in the text world, let alone when you begin to start seeing video appear as well.
But that bit, sorry for just coughing over you, but that bit actually really matters in our world, because we've got this sort of dual trend at the minute where the current generation and younger generations want authenticity more than they ever have.
Yeah.
And yet we've got this generative stuff that feels inauthentic, especially when it's never, songs that have never been sung by someone or words that have never been said by someone. Or as you say, like a boss in an organization sending out a comms that has been generated by AI. So how do we kind of marry those two? And is there a way for, particularly from a comms perspective, to use it in a way that can still produce that authenticity?
So we've seen a number of firms begin to release what are probably called like ethical codes of practice when it comes to AI, or ethical standards. And I think that it's not really practical, I think, to be trying to do this in every tweet or every press release that is written. This bit was written by AI and this bit wasn't. But I think making at least some kind of broad principle statements to.
So it's almost like the paid ads on social.
Yeah.
When you say that this has been paid for, this post has been paid for.
To a certain
extent. Very clear about it.
Yeah, being very clear about it. But I think it's impractical to try and do that on a comms by comms level.
Right.
So I think the first thing is, agree your standards as a company, agree your standards with your clients. This is what we will and will not use these tools for. This is the service you're paying for, either because you want a human to write it, or actually you want the efficiency of a human plus an AI to write it. But whatever that line is for you as your organization, and there is no right or wrong line, by the way, that is just something that everyone needs to determine for themselves, but at least be upfront about that in the first place. And then you could hopefully kind of go forward and kind of play nicely from there onwards. At least that's what we would hope for most people. But I think the big thing is that if you're not setting down a kind of clear set of guidelines to begin with, then no one knows what kind of framework they're operating within. And particularly for teams, if I came to you guys with a task, and I said, "Oh, can you get me this done by Friday?" And you were like, "Well, the only way we can do that is by using these AI tools, and you can guarantee me the quality is going to be as good as if you didn't do it, but it took 2 weeks." I would pick get it done by Friday with the AI tools. Why wouldn't I? Because that cheap, fast, or good triangle still exists. You can only pick two. I'll happily often try cheap for fast or fast for good, but more often than not, most people will pick.
And to create these guidelines, you just need to go to ChatGPT and say, "Can you create me something?" Yeah.
Well, so that's a good point. So there's a number of good resources out there that people can go to start getting started with that. Aside from, obviously, give us a call. But aside from that, I think we particularly endorse the work that's been done by the Linux Foundation and their Open Voice Network, which we've been a part of for a number of years, which is a non-profit that has established a set of guidelines for the ethical deployment, particularly of conversational AI, so people can go and check that out. Many of the big platforms themselves have very good kind of baseline guidelines that you can go and look at. Google's in particular, there are many others, I'm not just endorsing them, but Google's own ethical AI framework is a particularly helpful one, I think, if you want to get started. And then, maybe take those baselines and go have a conversation with Claude or Google Bard and work out your own ones, but make sure that you know what they are is the first message, really.
Yeah.
It does feel like, obviously, a lot of this conversation, people may say, right, I understand what James said there, or I'm going to have to go and research this. No idea what this concept is, but I like the idea of it. I'm assuming there are entry points, as you've just explained, for people who just want to dip the toe in.
Yeah.
There are those who it relies on their job to be experts in this and they really need to up level. Are there easy access tiers for people that they can jump on and off at different heights, or does it really need to be, you need to invest fully because it's ever changing, isn't it? It's fast moving.
Well, so I think that we're already seeing from our own data that many people are already doing that exploration work themselves, and naturally will do. The real question is, I think, particularly for business owners and for leaders in this context, is you are now faced with this challenge of you either don't go after this stuff and wait for competitors to do so, or you maybe there's not an obvious competitor, but you're just leaving opportunity on the table by not acting faster, smarter, better if you can do. So in terms of the entry points, I think the first thing is to get that education level up. We're seeing that it's patchy at the moment, that people could be probably better educated about the real potential of how to use this technology rather than just what they saw on TikTok or what they read in like one blog post.
Or heard from James Poulter on this.
Yeah, or watch my LinkedIn videos. So get started. So I mean, we run generative AI training courses at a variety of different levels. There are a number of other great organizations that do that as well. So that would be probably a first thing, is get your teams up levels so that you all kind of know what you're working with. And then going beyond that, I think that there's real opportunity for all sorts of organisations to begin to build their own assistants that will help them, kind of be more effective. OpenAI a couple of weeks ago released their GPTs model, which basically allows you to build these kind of custom mini versions of ChatGPT with your own data in a more secure way. And we're already building a number of those within Vixen to help us run our own processes faster. So I think if all companies began to think in that way, you would probably find that you would get a lot further a lot quicker. But that does require that baseline of knowledge to already be there. So I think start by getting people trained up.
And I think it's fair to say, Gareth, even for us at Jersey Road, obviously from the top down, I think you've been very intentional, haven't you, in actually that if we're going to service clients and speak to people about AI, then we've actually made that quite a central part of who we are as well. And I think, there's a lesson there for everyone, isn't there, that we all need to start somewhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said earlier, I'm a complete novice with this stuff. I feel like a dinosaur when I'm listening to James speak, but I think there's just no getting away from the fact that this is absolutely core, particularly in the world that we work in. Utility and comms, a lot of the trends in AI have been quite comms centric, and therefore, they are affecting how do we think about our agency as well, going forward for the next 5-10 years. I actually am not concerned about whether there will be jobs in our sector. It's just that there will be different jobs, I think. Yeah. And actually, it's certainly from a content generation perspective, the writing of stuff is often the laborious part of what we do. Is actually the strategic stuff is quite exciting stuff, and being with people and pitching and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's fascinating just to hear where we are in this journey right now, because it feels like we're on the kind of start of the roller coaster is about to tip over the edge in a good way. That sounded like it was negative, but I'm actually really excited by the potential. I do completely recognize the ethical concerns and the fact that there are fears around this as well. But I think both from a comms perspective and from a faith perspective, I think this is it opens up opportunities that just weren't there previously.
Yeah, I think it becomes also one of the big things for comms professionals, whether people working in house or in agencies, is that in a world where all content may have been generated by an AI, I would hope that we would see a rising of that tide where the stuff that actually is human created becomes seen more as not just a luxury item, but like the really valuable premium thing. Yeah, it's like the supercars salesman, right? Like, the Bugatti, they stopped selling Bugattis at car shows, right? Because they would take the Bugattis to car shows and they were so much more expensive than all of the other cars. They couldn't sell any cars. So where did they start selling the Bugattis? Boat shows. Go to boat shows. If you're willing to drop $1.5 million on a boat, you'll buy a 300 grand car, no problem whatsoever, right? So it's all about what market does then the human content that we create choose to play within.
Yeah.
And I think when everything becomes commoditized, when it becomes so easy to get content, because most of that has been generated artificially, the human generated stuff actually becomes to be the luxury item, and we have to then go play a different game.
Right.
You can't keep playing in that same marketplace. So it becomes silly to compare, the price of creating all this content with AI was this, and the price of creating it with humans was that. Well, wrong show. Go play at the boat show. Stop trying to sell, with the used car salesman, because that content is, it's used. It's generated from a large amount of content that already existed. It's not original in that sense. And so we have an opportunity there.
The bigger danger is just assuming that the world is as it was 10 years ago and we'll just keep on doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But things have changed, and you need to kind of go with it. And it's a bit like, churches or Christian organizations trying to do what worked in the 60s or the 70s in 2020, whatever year we're in. But we're not in 2020. This is not. It's a very
new podcast.
Yeah, we're in 2027, let's say. But the trends, it feels, for AI are changing quite rapidly. So what's new in AI is almost a weekly news alert, if not hourly. Is there a sense of what's happening over the next kind of year, 2 years that would be helpful for people who are watching this to say, or listening to this to say, we need to just be kind of aware of where the AI is going?
So I'm interested in predictions. The biggest prediction we can make is actually not really around what's going to change, but what's going to stay the same.
Okay.
And I think that that's the thing that we should be focused on. The technology is going to get faster, better, cheaper. That tends to be our general trend that we can see from all technology down history, right? It's going to get faster, better, cheaper. And therefore, you would assume more widely available and more widely used. But I think what's going to stay the same is actually more important when all of that is changing around us. And I think that when we think about 2 years from now, when we're having this conversation again, we'll look back and say, well, what stayed the same?
Well, we won't be here because it'll be avatars.
Absolutely. We'll be doing this remotely from a headset. But what more likely will stay the same is that people will value the opinions of other people. And I think in the world of comms, that's what we're there for, right? It's influence in some form or other. Now, that can be seen as a dirty word sometimes, but it can be a really useful thing. That's what we're there for, is influence. And actually, I think we are still innately as humans designed to trust the opinions of other humans and club together in kind of groups of like-mindedness. And I don't think that's going to change. And so therefore I would be looking at, okay, well, where are the humans going to be? What are they going to be doing in the next couple of years? And yes, sure, maybe the internet will have been taken over by kind of bot farms of very cheap, very bad content flooded all over the place.
I think that's already happened.
Which is already happening. And it's going to happen at kind of a far more significant level. Then the question is, okay, well then where will the humans go? So I think you're going to see a real rise in people wanting to do live events. I think you're going to see a real rise in people wanting real video of real people sat around having real conversations, which isn't synthetically duplicated, because there was value, because those people saw it valuable enough to fight through train strikes to get to central London to sit with one another and have a coffee. And I think that true experiences are going to be the things that people still really, really want. The technology will continue to grow around it, and maybe it'll become easier, cheaper and faster to make those things happen. But ultimately, I don't think those things are going to change all that much.
Okay, final word to you, back to you, James. Just give us one takeaway, one bit of advice or your message to comms professionals that they can go and implement today, something they can do to just further their understanding or their journey of getting their head around AI.
Look at the one thing that you have to do the most often, that is the most painful, and go and see if you can ask one of these AI assistants to help you get that done. Maybe it can't do all of it for you, but maybe if it can just make it a little bit better. Because particularly if you're in a Christian organization watching this, or if you're in a church, or in a charity or some case, most of the time what you are trying to do, right, is take the resources you have and steward them the best way that you know how to have the greatest amount of impact. So why would you not take advantage of something that might help you do that, so long as you can do that in a way that it doesn't have negative secondary consequences, which I think is what we've been concerned about. So that would be what I would say is, look at your week, look at what you've spent the most time doing this week that was the most painful, that you did the most often. High likelihood that there is a chance there that one part of that could be automated, whether it's filling in a timesheet, whether it's writing a brief for the umpteenth time to the same person, whether it's kind of planning, I don't know, your route to work, or kind of putting together a kit list or whatever it might be. These are the types of things that we all do all of the time, and they're the things that can kind of hopefully be made faster, which I think is a big thing.
That's really helpful and encouraging. It feels like we could talk about this for forever. We might have to do a series just on AI. But for now, James, thank you so much for
thanks, guys,
fighting the rail strikes and coming in.
Glad to be here.
Appreciate it. And Gareth,
thank you.
Episode 1 in the back.
There wasn't a thank you at the end of that. Okay, fair enough.
Thank you, though. Thanks for showing up. And if you have enjoyed what you've watched or listened to in this episode, we'd love to encourage you to head over to jerseyroadpr.com to find out more about who we are and the resources we have to offer, or you can go over to our social media and follow us there.